everyone, to another episode of the Ionic Show. Yay! Woo! As you can see, we're all very, very excited. We're here to talk about something pretty awesome coming up in the Ionic world, and that is Ionic 5. One of the latest and greatest versions of Ionic to have ever existed. To talk about Ionic 5, I'm joined by Adam Bradley, Brandy Carney, and Liam DeBeasi, or DeBeast Mode. I will call him that. So let's kick things off. Who wants to take this first kind of question or point? How is Ionic 5 different from any other version of Ionic?
Okay, so I guess I'll start. Ionic 5 is a lot different because it is mainly going to be focused on design changes. In the past, we've had where it's been like a complete rewrite from Ionic 1 to Ionic 2 using Angular 1 to Angular 2, or going from 2 to 3, or sorry, 2/3 to 4. I knew I was going to confuse that. Going from 3 to 4 basically was a little bit of a rewrite because of web components. So Ionic 5 is going to be mainly focused on just the design changes. So it's not going to be a big rewrite to your app.
Yeah, what I really love about the V4 to V5 change is that it really isn't a huge rewrite. It's kind of just a design change. It's like, so the components are used the same properties, same component names, same attributes. Everything's just pretty much identical, except it's got a little bit different look, more modern look. And so that is a big difference between going different versions. So that's why we want to really start it off first by saying that this isn't a major change. So we're really just looking forward to everyone upgrading and seeing the new design updates.
I know there's been a couple of emails and with the different newsletters that we have going out, someone replied back with, I just got onto Ionic 4 and now we're already talking about Ionic 5. It never ends. And I think it is good to note that this is, like you said, just like a really incremental update. We're not having you rewrite your entire app all over again. You should be able to just update the package versions and everything would just work.
Yeah, I think in V4 we got a really solid foundation, and then in V5 we're really just iterating and improving and refining and learning from the things that we did right and the things that are maybe not so great, and just making things better and better as we go.
Yeah, and there are some breaking changes that we wanted to remove. Some stuff that there's more cruft that I think, because we're doing a design change, because we are changing the major version, there were a handful of things we do want to remove, and so that's all being listed in our breaking changes doc, but it's nothing major really. It's really the stuff that isn't being used, or we wanted to remove it because it was causing more confusion. So if anything, we were using this opportunity to kind of clean things up a bit more too.
And we've been pretty proactive about marking things as deprecated in various 4.0 releases. So I know one of them with Toast, it went from having its own dedicated close button text. Show close button. And now it's following the same kind of pattern, but you still support it and just log out, hey, this is eventually going to be removed. Follow these things.
Yeah, so we added deprecation warnings. So we definitely recommend getting on the latest version of Ionic 4 before you even start to update to Ionic 5, because it will show you deprecation warnings that are specific to your app. And like Mike was saying, like with Toast, we realized that we had multiple properties for showing the close button and changing the close button text. But in other overlays like alert and action sheet, we just had an array of buttons, and each button would have a text property and an icon and a role and stuff like that. So we basically just updated Toast to where it's more in line with how the other components work. So a lot of our breaking changes were just us trying to improve on our consistency across the framework.
And instead of having to figure out, okay, I'm using this overlay, it has its own specific quirks about how things are done. Now we have this really unified API. And, that kind of goes on to what Liam was saying of taking what we have and just redefining it and solidifying all the APIs across all the components, which, I hope that when the users get 5.0 and they're able to look at it and see these changes, they're like, that's a really good change. I appreciate that.
Yeah, makes more sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they can start using it now, right? There's release candidates or betas are out already.
Yeah, we have 3 betas out right now.
3 betas, yep. More to come, probably.
Yeah, we should have some more soon because we have a few things we need to get merged in.
Looking at my PR. When is that going to get merged, Brandy? Only been waiting since October for it.
Don't blame me for that.
We're moving that to the bottom of the list now.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll get to that maybe at the end of the week or after Christmas or something.
Sounds good. So if this is going to be more of a design update, both in terms of API, the API shape and decisions, and also the styles, what kind of design changes should the users be expecting? Like, are we going to be bringing back Windows Vista look, Windows 7 maybe?
I'm not, no.
Mike, you spoiled it. It's supposed to be a surprise.
Yeah, no. So the major design changes are going to be surrounding iOS. iOS 13 got released, and with iOS 13, they decided to overhaul a lot of the components. Segment being a big one, the header large title being another one, pull to refresh. What am I missing? The menu, the way the menu looks when it slides over, some page transitions, new box shadows. I feel like I'm missing things. But basically, it's going to mostly be changes to iOS and a few things that got in for material design as well, just because the fixes with iOS, we could kind of fit in the material design changes as well. And here's my dog. She wanted to join.
I know a good one that Liam, you shared the other day, was a nice little update to not only just iOS's pull to refresh, but material design's pull to refresh as well. And I think when I saw that, I kind of got blown away. I thought that was the actual pull to refresh from like Chrome browser. I was like, that looks really good. So
yeah, it looks really, really nice. Yeah. Well done, Liam.
Yeah, that one was definitely fun to work on. And I think it's been pretty indicative of where we've been going. It's really been like, how can we build these components in a way that it works with the browser, not against it? Let the browser do a lot of the heavy lifting. For example, I was doing the pull to refresh on iOS, and a lot of that was, let's find what the browser exposes and see how we can tap into that. And the end result, I think, is if I can speak for myself, a really smooth pull to refresh experience that has a little bit of haptic feedback and just feels very, quote unquote native like. So that's been a lot of fun to work on, and it's been pretty exciting in terms of how can we let the browser do the heavy lifting.
There's also been some updates to Ionicons, right?
Yes, there's been quite a few updates to them. I think now Ionicons V5 has an RC that's out, but we're waiting to release it, the 5 version when Ionic 5 goes out. But now it has 1,100 icons that Ben and Kevin worked tirelessly on. But yeah, it looks pretty amazing. But there is one significant change. Traditionally with Ionicons, what we wanted to do was have the icons switch between the different platforms, between iOS and Material. But one thing that Ben and Kevin really noticed was that with where the apps are going today is that a lot of them are using the exact same icon no matter what. So kind of how they have different icons depending on which mode you're on doesn't really play out as much as it did in the past. But what that does make things a lot easier now is that you can choose, I want specifically this icon to look on both of them, but that also frees up a lot of resources to build 1,100 icons rather than having 600 that match up exactly the same. And that was the problem, was having a 1-for-1 in every single platform and having it work exact same was the challenge. And even before that, iOS had outline version and it had the solid versions or the fill version. So to try to keep those all lined up was also pretty challenging. So really, I think with all the free time, they were able to create many more icons, but also I think make it easier for developers to choose exactly what they want and not have to worry about things switching out on them per platform. So in my opinion, I think it makes things a lot easier and also a lot easier to maintain.
I just want to add that you can still make Ionicons work to where it displays a different icon based on what mode, like if you want to do that. And I think one of the big things we're trying to push for is that Material Design already offers all of their icons open source. So if you wanted to use one of Material Design's icons, you still can, and you should.
Yeah, it's I guess the default is changing that. It's not automatically switching. Like if you use the airplane icon, it's not going to try to figure it out which one it means to. If you use airplane icon, that's the one you're going to use. But what Brandy is saying, you can still choose, well, I want these two different ones. And I think there's about 4 or 5 icons that we do still by default switch out, and that would be like the back button, chevron, the detail page that iOS uses but Material doesn't use. The more icons, like the 3 dots, I think it's Material always uses them vertically and iOS uses them horizontally, or vice versa. So there's still a handful of them that they are very, very specific to the platform, but that's more at Ionics level now of how they switch out, and not so much Ionicons, the component that switches them out.
So having this really fine-grained control of, you'll get something that looks the same on every platform, but when you want to go down and say, switch this icon completely out for iOS and Android, you can still have that fine-grained control that people have expected since at least Ionic 2.
Yeah, exactly. And then it just makes maintenance a lot easier all around. So I'm a big fan of it. It also, again, there's so many more icons to choose from now. And not having to do that one-for-one matching makes things a lot easier to do.
Only 1,100 icons.
Only 1,100 to choose from. Hopefully there's an edit icon. Randy will know what I'm talking about.
The pencil.
Is there a save icon though?
Yeah.
Floppy disk. That was it.
The floppy disk.
Yeah.
Yeah. We needed that one. I think we bugged Ben about it until he finally added it.
Or for the younger people listening or watching, thing that you see in like Microsoft Word where it says save, that is the floppy disk.
Liam's so confused right now.
Bringing it back. A 3D printed save button.
Liam's like, I'm just gonna leave.
Bye.
So awesome component updates, brand new icon and Ionicon updates. What else do we have coming in the in 5.0?
So I was gonna say, I think that there was a talking point on what have we learned from Ionic 4, and I was just gonna say like that we've learned that the customization of the components has been generally very difficult to users, and we've had a lot of feedback about CSS variables not being available, making it hard to override scoped components because you have to use important in the CSS, things like that. So what we've really been trying to do is to convert components to shadow, to make it easier to override scoped components where you don't have to use any important or like really long selectors. And then also we're experimenting with adding shadow parts. So shadow parts are going to make it a lot easier for users to where they can just target a specific component inside of a shadow component. Does that make sense?
So for like a layman's explanation, yeah, it's like if you had input : placeholder, or like some of these really specific built-in like pseudo selectors for like video control, text inputs, like you can start to style some of the more internalized parts of a native web component or a native browser component. CSS parts and themes, more, or the parts aspect of it, more or less allows you to replicate that kind of approach and expose the internals of a web component to the user's own CSS. So we don't have to have a CSS variable for everything.
Yeah, and I think another thing to really point out is the reason why, so from V4 to V5, there's been many, many internal changes, many different new divs, spans, CSS classes, all sorts of different CSS. Lots of stuff has changed, right? But here we are, we're talking about it's just a design update, and don't worry about the big updates. I think a lot of that can be attributed to Shadow DOM, our use of Shadow DOM. It's because we have kind of tuck that stuff away and then allow every single div and class, everything to be edited, to be changed, customized, then that's what made it easier for us to move to V5 without having many breaking changes. So, so while it does make things more challenging sometimes for certain things to style, well, we can certainly add a CSS property for that. We can make it easier to style. But that's also the reason why we can move to V5 without having to have everyone rewrite their apps again and have to start from scratch again. So I did want to point that out, that that's actually a really cool thing. I don't think a lot of people realize that we're able to do with Shadow DOM.
And then parts and themes really just the parts really just pushes that forward by saying, all right, we understand that your design for your app is going to be very, driven by what your internal logic is, your internal company's like design guidelines. We should be able to expose certain parts of it and still keep a consistent design of our own components, but let you customize the parts that you need to customize.
Yep, exactly. And the CSS properties are more of a vague kind of control of saying, I want the background color to be this, or I want the padding to be this. But what that actually means internally might be a different div, because it probably did change quite a bit, especially like header and segment. They're completely different components, but how people are going to use them between 4 and 5 is identical.
Now, what was the driving decision to start to use parts? Because I know for the longest time it's been in the spec work, and I think Chrome was the only one who actually supported it.
Yeah, so I think Safari recently added some kind of support. I don't think it's published. I think it's still experimental, but it's now supported in all browsers except for Safari's not complete yet. And then I think Edge is the last one right now to get full support. But sorry, go ahead.
I don't know where I get it from. I think it was January is when it's going to be fully supported.
I
So
think
Yeah,
so.
it sounds like January. Most things
Yeah.
like Firefox will be enabling it by default.
Yep.
Chromium Edge will be out January sometime, and then Safari will be at some point in the future.
Yeah.
So basically, all the major browser vendors that are more or less evergreen these days will have support for this feature, and will be able to just take advantage of it and use it all over Ionic.
Yeah. And so what part does, like, I just want to try and explain it another way, is basically whenever people would go to like customize like our input component or whatever, they would say, oh, I can't access the native input because we have like our Ion input component and it renders a native input component or native input element. And people would want to actually modify like that inner input element, but because of it being in a shadow, you wouldn't be able to modify it directly without doing some hackiness. And so what parts does is it allows us to say like this input part is named native input or whatever. And then the user will be able to say, I want to take Ion input in the CSS, Ion input :part parentheses native input, and then apply CSS directly to it.
So kind of exposing the Shadow DOM portion in a more specific way than just custom properties or variables.
Yeah. So it allows us to not have to have a CSS variable for everything that input could possibly have: padding, margin, font, everything. Like we don't have to expose all of that.
We don't have to re-implement CSS.
Yeah, and it still allows the internal to the component. Like you can move that input element to somewhere else, to a different selector somewhere else, and how the user wrote the code would still work. So that's also the cool part about it.
Yeah.
Now to move on from CSS, I know there is a new API that I'm excited about, and that's the gestures and animation APIs that we've had for a while. I don't think really ever documented or exposed in a clean way.
Yeah. So we've been sort of hinting at it over the past few months in terms of new cool APIs. But yeah, with V5, we'll be rolling out officially what I've been sort of calling Ionic animations and Ionic gestures. And sort of how Mike said, we've had these utilities internal to Ionic framework for quite some time to do animations, to do gestures like swipe to go back on iOS. That's both an animation and a gesture. And with V5, we sort of modernized it, cleaned it up a little bit, and we said, hey, why don't we expose this for developers to use in their apps? And with V5, you'll be able to do that. We've been testing it for quite some time. We've been using it in a lot of real world examples, and I think the initial feedback has been really positive. Not only that, but also the performance benchmarks, especially for animations, have been very, very exciting and pretty cool. So, I'll be, I don't really know how else to describe it other than it's cool, but, as we get closer to the V5 launch, we'll be, showing more of those benchmarks and comparisons and how they sort of come together in real world applications. But to sort of summarize both the APIs briefly, Ionic Animations is really just going to be this open source animation utility that provides the tools developers need to build these really highly performant animations, regardless of the framework they're going to be using. So these animation utilities are going to work in Angular apps and React apps. You don't even have to be using Ionic framework applications to be using this tool, which is really kind of cool. So it appeals to the wider web development community. Of course, it works great with Ionic framework. All animations inside Ionic framework are powered by Ionic animations, which is really, really cool. So why it sort of came about, first we needed a way of doing animations within the framework. We looked at external animation libraries, and they were really good, but there were two reasons why we sort of turned them down. First is it's another big dependency that we force on the user. And the second is it didn't really touch upon all of our performance metrics that we were really hoping for. I think, the big one is, again, overall frames per second. You want those 60 frame per second animations, because if you don't, your end users are going to notice that, and the user experiences are going to suffer. But the other three things that we were really interested in that the other libraries didn't really meet our needs for were the amount of work that's happening on the main thread, the average CPU usage, and the energy impact, right? How much battery this animation is going to consume. And so a lot of these libraries will take what I call a JavaScript-driven approach to these animations, where they'll have a request animation frame loop, and in every loop, they will basically just recalculate, recompute every single value for every animation for every element, and then pass that off to the browser to do a full re-render. And that's fine. And on higher level, more powerful devices, you can usually get 60 frames per second. But the amount of work that you have to do under the hood is pretty high. And all of this is going to be happening on the main thread. And in turn, more main thread processing means a higher CPU usage, and a higher CPU usage means more energy impact. And so Ionic Animations is built on the Web Animations API with a fallback to CSS animations. And so that lets us naturally have a really, really low main thread usage, a low average CPU usage, and therefore a really, really low energy impact, which is pretty big for mobile devices in particular, some lower powered devices that may not have as powerful a GPU, as big of a battery. So again, we have all the benchmarks and all the tests, and the results have been really, really exciting and really, really impressive. So I'm looking forward to being able to share more of that down the road. And then the gestures, it's similar to some of the gesture libraries that you've seen out there today. I think one of the issues we saw was that some of the current third-party libraries are a little heavy-handed with how they manage the gestures. One common thing I've seen is, you're using a certain gesture recognizer, like a long press or a pen or a swipe, and it works, but it ends up preventing scrolling on content behind it. So it's very heavy-handed in how it manages these events. And so the Ionic Gestures utility, which we'll be releasing with V5, it's really, really good at letting you do these recognizers in a simple and fast way, and then it gets out of your way for the rest of your application logic code.
Yeah, that's huge, especially for gestures. Is the challenge we've always had with Ionic is it's a very global thing, right? A touch is very global. It could be from anywhere. So there's normally like window.hammer would try to take control of everything, even though you're trying to say, well, I'm actually just trying to slide the page, or am I trying to open the menu, or am I trying to slide open an item? So there's so many different things that the gesture library doesn't actually know what you're trying to do. And so with what we wanted to provide within Ionic's gestures is to give that ability to say, this one has more priority than this one. This is something you'd see kind of in more of a native application too. So yeah, this has been something that we've had internally for a while, but yeah, everything that's been going on with V5 is exposing it with like Liam was saying, it's been touched up quite a bit, cleaned up to be used externally.
Now,
and also, I also want to go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying it's really awesome that it's getting to the point where it's not just about shipping a good API, but shipping something that's going to be conscious of the user's energy usage. Like, it's not going to drain your battery to have these animations running in the background. And I don't really. There we go. I don't really see like other libraries kind of talking about that aspect or even thinking about what's the impact on the user's battery for this API, which is really nice.
Yeah, and something that Liam already touched on was that we really want to let the browser do most of the work, and that's something that we did traditionally with since Ionic 2 we've had this animation library. But what it did was not use a request animation frame loop and constantly run JavaScript every single frame, like Liam was saying. But we, assign CSS animations to an exact element. We did that once, let the animation play out, let the browser handle how the animation was working, and then when it was done, we would pick up from there. But the key was we always let the browser do the heavy lifting, and that's how I think we're able to do some good animations. And so what Liam has done with the latest version is pretty cool. Is that's now kind of the fallback way. And still lets CSS or web animations kind of do the heavy lifting. So again, Ionic is just saying, hey, animate these things. Browser, go ahead and do it. Tell us when you're done. But Ionic isn't providing a lot of that logic, a lot of that low-level code to try to make that work. It's letting the browser do everything.
Yeah, and one interesting thing Mike mentioned about energy impact and why are other people not really concerned about that? I think that stems from maybe some of the hype around like hardware acceleration and doing preferring transforms over animating top and left. I think one of the ideas right now is that if you hardware accelerate things, it just kind of solves all your problems, which it solves a lot of your problems and it allows your animation to be a lot more performant. But the other thing to consider is this hardware acceleration on the GPU, you're engaging this new higher powered piece of hardware, and so that's going to drain your battery more. And so the more you engage it, the more you're going to consume your energy, the more you need to sort of keep that in mind. I think a good example of this is a lot of the MacBook Pros will ship with two graphics cards. They'll have an integrated one and a discrete one. And the discrete one is really powerful, but it uses a lot more energy. And so when you're on battery, when you're not plugged into the wall, it's going to switch that lower powered graphics card. So the fact that you're hardware accelerating your animations is really, really good, but also just bear in mind that it's also going to have other impacts that you might not really expect.
I had no idea about the two graphics cards.
I think it's only in the larger models. I don't think the 13-inch has two cards.
So we have new animations, we have new gesture APIs. We also have a few additional components. We have refresher that we talked about, large titles and collapsible headers. Have we talked about those?
Okay, that's me. I forgot I worked on those. That was so long ago. Yeah, so the large title and the collapsible headers for iOS users, if you go into like the settings app, you have that large settings title. As you pull down, it'll sort of scale up, and then as you scroll the other direction, the toolbars like the search bar, the title will sort of collapse into each other until you scroll all the way down, and you get that smaller settings title. That was another example of working with the browser, letting the browser do a lot of the heavy lifting. That really just taps into scrolling. There's really no custom logic other than maybe just figuring how much to scale by. And so again, the end result is a really, really smooth native-like experience. We've had it as an experimental feature in V4. So if you want to start testing it out, grab the latest version of V4, but it'll become considered stable in V5. And a lot of people have been using it, and a lot of people have been, filing bugs and providing feedback. And so it's been really nice to see how excited people are to be able to get their hands on these newer updates and start playing with it before it's out for everyone else.
Yeah, having tried it in my own apps, it is pretty awesome to see, and I'm excited to get it, see it ship and be stable and the default for people coming up in the future. So with Ionic 5 and all the changes that we have coming down the pipeline, what does the future hold for Ionic 6? Eventually we'll have Ionic 6 and then we'll have Ionic 7 and 8. Like, do we expect to have all these awesome features, or do we think that this is just going to be the standard going forward of small changes here and there,
Wait,
constant release schedule?
are we allowed to mention virtual scroll?
We don't even have 5 out yet. Now we're already talking about 6.
There's Josh behind you, Adam. He's waving. Yeah, why are we talking about Ionic 6? Calm down. Let's back up.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to have a discussion about, we're doing semantic releases. We're doing, major minor changes.
So with that, yeah, okay. So we have followed Simver versioning since I think Ionic 4, right? Was whenever we kind of really committed to it. And basically what Simver, the convention is that if you make any backwards incompatible API changes in the framework, that you have to release a major version. We have been trying to commit to not doing that any more than once every 6 months. And I think even now, this is our first one in a year because we released Ionic 4 in January of this year. But we've basically been committing to not introducing any breaking changes in the API. But with the design changes, we did need to implement some breaking changes in order to actually have them functioning properly. So we basically plan to have the design changes go in with this major release and any other, smaller breaking changes that we needed to get in to make the framework more consistent, like renaming. I think we renamed one component or two, Ion Nav Push and Ion Nav Pop and Ion Nav Set Root. Those got renamed to be one component called Ion Nav Link because it didn't make sense that we had multiple components doing the same thing basically. So yeah, basically that's the whole thing is that V5 comes around because we needed to get some breaking changes in order to improve the framework. But we don't have anything planned for V6 unless you want me to mention virtual scroll. But other than that, it's basically just kind of as we find things that we think need to be improved and we know that we need to break the API in order to implement them, they will be going into our backlog of things that we will do in V6. And then once we kind of have an idea of everything that we're going to do is whenever we'll start planning that. Did I cover it?
Yeah, and I think it definitely follow what we're doing with 5, where it's larger design updates, really minimal actual breaking changes. But yeah, like since 4, I think we're good to go with how things are designed. So I would like to think that 6 would again be it's going to have some breaking changes, but it's still largely the same.
Yeah, it's definitely not rewriting your app like you had to in the past. So.
And just to make sure that we're all clear, V6 is no way in any shape or form planned or going to be something we're going to talk about for a long time.
Not even a milestone.
It's not even in our minds yet. So
no, thanks, Mike. Good job.
Yeah.
You're welcome. So I think we've covered a lot of things. Is there anything else that we want to talk about?
Angular 9?
Angular 9.
Wait. Okay, yeah, we can do that. I was gonna say that we did have some other breaking changes that we didn't really mention. I didn't know if you wanted to talk about those while we were on the breaking changes subject.
Well, yeah, let's talk about those while we're talking about breaking changes. Okay. What are those, Brandy?
Let me pull this up. All right, so the biggest one is going to be the CSS utility attributes. Back in Ionic 4, I want to say it was really early, like 4.3 or something like that. We added in classes for the CSS utilities. So think of the padding, the margin, the text alignment, the flex box, all of those CSS attributes that we offered, like text center, padding, margin left, margin right, all of those. We added in class versions. So rather than adding it as an attribute that says padding dash left, it would be a class that's called Ion padding left. And we updated the docs to reflect that pretty much around the same time, 4.3 or so.
Yeah, and just to add to that, that was largely for Ionic React. Also because I think it's a better idea in general is to use a class for an attribute. But the real reason is because, you know, JSX doesn't like random attributes added. And if we were using them as attributes, the things didn't play well. So it's a better idea to have them CSS classes to begin with, but that's why we're dropping the attributes for CSS classes.
Yeah, so it was basically any framework that used typing and like JSX would basically error out because it didn't think that padding was a property of that element. So rather than basically brute force all of our CSS utility or all of our attribute classes, I can't say it, attribute utilities, rather than brute force all of those as properties of the web component, we decided to just kind of change them over to classes. And rather than having attributes for some frameworks and classes for other frameworks, we are dropping the attributes entirely and we're only going to support the classes.
Yeah, and I like it a lot better too. I mean, it is a lot cleaner, I think.
I think it makes more sense. And we added Ion in front, so you kind of know like this is an Ionic specific class and it won't cause any like interference with your own CSS, hopefully, unless you use Ion as a prefix.
Yeah, and so this whole time since 4.3, both have worked. So if you're using attributes, you might be getting warnings now, some deprecated warnings to use the CSS classes. But yeah, starting in 5 when only the classes will work.
Yeah, I think the deprecation warnings were added like 4.10 or something. It was kind of later when we added deprecation warnings. But that's why we recommend updating to the latest version of 4 before updating to Ionic 5.
See what is potentially going to break and then or change in 5.0 so you can be better prepared for everything.
Yes. But I think that's all on the CSS utilities. You want me to keep going?
No, I think it's actually just really, really nice that it's moving back to classes and having the Ion prefix, because I know a lot of concern that a lot of comments that we heard even when we first did the attribute selectors back in like V2 was there was some collision between third-party frameworks or third-party CSS libraries. So there we go. So having it all just kind of be isolated and prefixed to our own selectors, I think is just going to make things a lot better for the future.
Yeah, I think it's going to be more consistent across the frameworks, and I think it makes more sense whenever you're actually working with CSS that a class would style it a certain way.
Right. And then Angular 9 that Adam mentioned earlier has been my little project for the past month and a half or so.
Yep, I've been seeing lots of commits.
Only like 25 commits, and most of those are just lint. I forgot a semicolon.
Yeah.
But yeah, Angular 9 is going to be a thing. I think they officially announced the other day that it's not going to come out before the end of the year. So expect to see more maybe RCs or more news about it in 2020. But Angular 9 introduces so many new changes to that are internal to Angular itself, like the new IB renderer, faster build times with the CLI, that we're able to take advantage of those without having to completely rewrite all of our components yet again. But for the users, you're going to get an app that is built in, be a significantly smaller footprint. I think I did Star Trek and it went from like 550 kilobytes in the main JS chunk down to like 475. So depending on what features you're using, you're going to see, a different build size, but you can start to remove certain pieces of Angular's renderer that, if you're not using ngIf, you don't have to pay the cost for ngIf. Same thing with pipes, injectables, like any piece of Angular that you're not using, you can just get rid of and not have to pay the cost for it, which is going to be really, really nice when that happens, and then potentially even better bundle sizes when build tools get updated and everything else.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, and especially the build times. I think that'll be a welcoming. It's always, you can never have fast enough build times. So that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I know they've been doing like really simple changes too, like going from, instead of building your app twice to do an ES5 and then an ES 2015, they'll go and they'll build an ES 2015 version, and then from that run it through a smaller and faster build process to produce the ES5 version. So differential builds will become much faster, but then just reloads in being able to have your node modules essentially know that they are always going to be static and not have to reprocess them. So you're only going to be updating home.page.ts or your home component, your whatever component you're working on. They can localize what is being rebuilt and have that just be, 1 or 2 seconds of waiting. So larger apps with like hundreds of components will definitely benefit from having all of these updates.
That's cool. And then SSR.
Yeah, server-side rendering.
Yeah, Mike and I have been plugging away on that, so we think that we've got it in a pretty good position here
Yeah,
from V5 and Angular 9.
I know we've hinted and talked about server-side rendering for some time now. I know there is a tweet of mine with a video that constantly gets attention and messages of, is this ready yet? Where are the docs for this? How can I do server-side rendering? With a lot of the changes that happen in Angular 9 and their universal package, we want to wait and see what was going to require updates from us. But we also had some, smaller quirks that we needed to iron out as well. And I think as of 2 days ago, we have like an official build that does all of server-side rendering, hydrates the components, can server-side render a web component, and reload the entire app and have it just work, quote unquote.
It's pretty
it
cool.
Just works.
Yeah.
And all
cool.
this, and all this, just you install Angular Server, the Ionic Angular Server package, add it to your server module, and it just works. So
it'll be one extra module. So you got Ionic/Angular-server. So it'll be one more thing to add for the how Angular Universal works. Would be into that package.
So when is this getting merged?
I don't know, Liam. When is it being merged?
Working on it.
Liam's like, I had no idea.
It'll get merged when it gets merged. Not a moment before, not a moment later.
Yeah, it has been a moving target, so that's a lot of why it's taken a while. I mean, we don't want to release something that doesn't work, or we know Angular something changes. So that's a lot of it behind why it hasn't been released. But I feel as though we're close finally.
The correct answer is soon.
Soon.
I mean, it also required like a lot of just waiting, because we had to test, build the framework, build everything, add it to the project, then do a like a build of the browser to server build, and then test it out. Now I think they added like a live reload server for universal apps. So the feedback and testing process has been much faster. So that is a welcome change, and I'm sure everyone will appreciate that when they are starting to upgrade and do Angular Universal. And then React stuff is just going to keep getting better and better. Now that we have a good basis for universal Angular, server-side rendering in React, maybe?
I think so. It's largely, that's what's kind of cool about our components, is that the server-side rendering of it is pretty, it's just a node script. I mean, it's kind of oblivious to whatever framework's running it. So in Angular, we import Ionic hydrate, and Gatsby or Next.js, we do the same thing and be able to hydrate the components after the framework hydrates their components.
Awesome. This is going to be, I know Gatsby and Next.js are two of the more popular React solutions. So it'll be good to have some integration story there.
Yeah.
So we are coming up close on our time. I think we've covered everything that we want to talk about. Ionic 5, when can we expect a release date, Brandy?
Well, wait, I wanted to add one more thing.
Sure.
So I just was thinking back on the changes that we made for CSS and stuff. And one of the big things that we did recently was update all of the Ionic default colors. And I just wanted to bring attention to that because not only did we update the defaults, but Ben, all Ben, created a set of Ionic colors that look really nice with a dark theme. And then I also went through and made a bunch of updates for our components to work with dark theme and added some documentation. Mike started it and I added on to it. So that was a joint effort, but we added some documentation for dark theme. And that's actually live now. And I believe you should get most of the benefits in Ionic 4, but Ionic 5 will add in the new colors. And it honestly shouldn't be breaking in any Angular app since everybody has them defined already. So people will have to make those updates. But anybody that doesn't have them, the variables for our colors defined, will have to make those updates.
Dark mode, all the things. Such a great note to end on.
Yes, it looks nice. I think that was all I wanted to add on that.
Awesome. Well,
okay.
Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Thank you, Adam, Brandy, Liam, for joining.
Didn't you want to? You asked when the release was.
Well, I figured dark mode was your way of avoiding answering that question.
Oh no, I was just wanting to add that in before we got to the release. Okay, so I will answer. We are planning a January release due to the holidays, but as you know, we will not release it unless everything's perfect.
So things may happen and that date may get pushed back, but
right now it's going to be about a year, right? When is V4?
It was January 23rd, I think.
Yeah, 23rd.
It's my first day.
Was it January 23rd? Yeah, I don't know why I remember that.
Yeah, it was up and finally got it done.
I think I remember because I was the one that released it and had to deal with it.
I was like, it was my first day. I was like, what do I do? Everyone's super busy with V4. I was like, I'll just sit here.
Just watch the Slack channel as we're all just like, all right, we got to get this release process going. Start to build. Did the release work? No.
It's breaking. The tests are failing.
We promise it's not as hectic as it sounds.
This time it won't be like that, though, I'm sure.
No.
This time will be perfect.
Maybe. We'll see.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. This has been a really fun episode. Be on the lookout for Ionic 5, potentially in January. Thanks for setting a hard date, Brandy.
January.
That's right.
Heard it here first, folks. Thank you all for joining. Take care.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.